Cemeteries are supposed to hold the dead. But what if one night the grave dug up its own mistake? What if you found a coffin with your name on it while you were still alive?
Hey, welcome back to my channel. Tonight I have a story that will chill you to your bones. They say cemeteries only hold the dead, but what happens when the grave itself makes a mistake? Stay with me until the end because this is the tale of the Wrong Coffin. Our story begins on a stormy night. Rain lashed the old village cemetery and lightning tore across the bruised sky. Thunder rumbled like the roar of some angry beast. The wind, as if in answer, clawed at the old trees lining the graveyard, bending their branches low as if in worship. Beneath a twisted headstone, a lone figure huddled, seeking shelter from the tempest. But even the stone monoliths could not keep the rain at bay. It soaked through the cracks, sending icy trickles down the weathered surface. As the minutes ticked by, the storm grew in ferocity. The ground, already saturated with water, began to collapse, forming a large crater in the middle of the cemetery. And then, pushing its way up through the mud and debris, something emerged. A coffin, heavy, muddy, and broken, surfaced in the flood. Word spread like wildfire through the village that night. Something unholy was happening in the cemetery. People stood at a distance, whispering prayers, too afraid to go near it. For who knew what evil might rise from the grave? Some said it was a sign of the devil's work, others the wrath of God. Among them stood Thomas Miller, a man in his early 30s, strong and sturdy, with eyes that mirrored the stormy sky above. Thomas lived alone in a small cottage on the outskirts of the village. His parents had passed away years ago, leaving him with a deep-rooted fear of losing those close to him. So when he heard the news about the coffin, his heart skipped a beat. He couldn't shake off the feeling that somehow it was connected to him. Mustering his courage, he joined the growing crowd. As the rain subsided and the villagers got closer, they saw that the coffin bore the inscription, Thomas Miller. Their faces drained of color, frozen in a mask of shock and dawning horror, because Thomas Miller wasn't dead. He was very much alive, standing right there in the crowd. Thomas felt his blood run cold. He stared at the coffin, his mind struggling to comprehend what his eyes were seeing. Inside the coffin lay a face that was his, or rather a face that was a perfect copy of him, eyes shut, lips pale, as if peacefully asleep. But how? How could he be dead and yet alive? Someone pointed to the gravestone beside the coffin. Carved into it were words that made Thomas's blood run cold. Thomas Miller died tomorrow. It was his name, his exact name, and the date on the stone read tomorrow. What did it mean? Why was he seeing his own dead body? Was this a cruel joke or a terrifying omen? Suddenly the air grew heavy with dread, and the silence was shattered by the sound of a shovel hitting metal. Everyone turned to see a young boy holding a silver locket that had fallen from the coffin. The locket was engraved with the initial TM. Taking a deep breath, Thomas stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He knelt beside the open coffin, his fingers brushing against the cold, lifeless skin of his doppelganger. It was then that he felt the full weight of the situation crush down upon him. He didn't need a gravestone to tell him he was in danger. He could feel it in his bones. That night he barely slept. The events of the evening replayed in his mind like a macabre movie. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside his window sounded like footsteps approaching his door. And when he closed his eyes, he saw the face staring back at him, a face that was his, yet wasn't. Then, in the dead of the night, he heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, heavy knocks against his front door. He shot up in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. What was out there? Who was at his door in the middle of the night? As he cautiously approached the door, his hand trembled on the handle. He took a deep breath and opened it. Outside, the wind howled, whipping his hair across his face. But when he looked down, he saw no one on his doorstep. All he saw were muddy footprints leading away from his door and back to the cemetery. Thomas shuddered, a chill crawling up his spine. He wanted to shake off the feeling of impending doom, but it was as if the cemetery had cast a shadow over him that he couldn't escape. Next morning, the coffin was gone. The grave was filled with earth as if it had never risen. Yet the gravestone remained, the date mocking him. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Had he dreamt it all? He searched for the locket, wanting to confirm that it was real, but it was nowhere to be found. It was as if the entire incident had been erased from existence. Still, he couldn't help but glance at the cemetery every time he went out, half expecting to see the coffin rise again. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the storm and the coffin began to fade into a dark corner of his mind. He tried to convince himself it was all a mistake, a figment of his imagination fueled by the storm. But he couldn't help but wonder what the priest had meant. If the grave has chosen you, nothing can stop it. You don't escape the earth. But then the second anniversary of his parents' death arrived. He was fixing an old photo frame when he heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, heavy knocks against the door. Thomas froze. This time he didn't bother to check outside. He knew what he would see, muddy footprints leading to his door. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped him. That night, he barely slept. The knocking continued, relentless and echoing in his dreams. At around 2 a.m., he heard screams in the distance, screams that sounded eerily like his own. Panic surged through him. What was happening? Why was it coming for him tonight? Driven by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, he crept to his window. Outside, the wind whipped around, and through the gaps in the curtains, he saw a flash of lightning. Then he saw it, the coffin. It was rising from the ground. He watched in horror as the lid creaked open. Inside, the corpse's eyes snapped open, glowing with an eerie light. In a flash, he understood. It wasn't a mistake. He was supposed to be in that coffin. Summoning a strength he didn't know he possessed, he bolted out of the door, racing towards the cemetery. He had to stop it from claiming him, had to change whatever was set in motion that night 2 years ago. Villagers were running, screaming, trying to get away from the cemetery, but Thomas ran towards it, his lungs burning, his legs heavy as lead. He couldn't stop. Something was dragging him back to the grave, calling him back to the earth. Then suddenly the coffin lid slammed shut. The ground shook as if the earth itself was taking a breath. The villagers stopped and turned to watch in suspense. What would happen next? Would it follow him? Would he vanish into the darkness of the grave? When Thomas finally reached the coffin, he put his hand on the cold wood. It was then that the earth claimed him. With a force that defied human strength, the coffin was dragged back into the ground, leaving behind a mound of freshly turned earth. The villagers crowded around, their faces pale with terror. The ground had sealed itself. At dawn, they returned, their faces drawn and somber. The grave was undisturbed. No new mound of earth, no fresh marks of disturbance, as if what had happened the night before had been a figment of their imagination. They started digging. Thomas's body was gone, and when they opened the coffin, they found a corpse that looked exactly like him. But there was something terribly wrong. The corpse was old, far too old to belong to the man they had known. It was as if 50 years had been added to his age. The body was rotting, decayed, and twisted in a way that made one's blood run cold. They buried the coffin for the last time and never spoke of it again. But the legend remains. They say if a coffin rises from the ground and it holds the face of someone still living, then the earth is correcting its mistake. And once the grave has chosen you, it always wins. So do you believe the earth can claim the living? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more haunted tales like this, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because the next story might just be darker than this one.